Right or die.
I go hard in the paint, yeah, homie, I'm a saint.
Right or die.
I said and what that meant and how that fits into what you're saying. That would be great.
Oh yeah, so my understanding was that you agreed with me that you could get different hard copy versions of the Quran that are all considered one Quran. You agreed that the speech of Moses, if you took it like God quoting Moses literally, then it would be in conflict or seem to contradict. But your response was you said it was actually it wasn't poetic. You said he was paraphrasing each time that he did the situation. So are we tracking an agreement so far?
No, that sounds fine. Nothing that you've said right now, quoting me, is unorthodox. This is all pretty standard stuff. Anything else?
No, I think so. I think what the confusion was is Khalil thought that I was saying that you're saying it is a true contradiction, but I'm saying that you're looking at it on the face value that it would be an apparent contradiction if you're saying God is actually quoting Moses instead of paraphrasing. I think that's where the disagreements come from.
I think the first thing I'd like to clarify is, or I'd like to ask you, do you feel that anything I said implies that I believe that the Quran is not preserved?
No, I was being charitable in the beginning of the conversation. If you
Mm-hmm.
go back and see it, and we were going off the basis that all variations are considered one complete Quran, and that the
Right.
abrogated stuff was not supposed to be there in the completed. So we
Mm-hmm.
had a lot of agreement. I think it was just Khalil's very new to that information, and he hasn't necessarily heard the different variations. And I think that he thought at the same time while he's finding this out that I'm saying that you're saying that the Quran is in a contradiction.
No, so from what I
You
heard in that discussion, um, when me and you got into it, James, was that you said that he agreed that there was different kinds of Qurans, that they that different dialects, right? And that those dialects could have words in it that mean completely different things. But yet he also says that all of them are one Quran. So if one Quran can say multiple different things, then those things would be internally contradictory, right? That's how myself and multiple other people in the argument took what you were saying, was that Brother Farid responds admitted that there were contradictions because words in the multiple types of Qurans had completely different meanings, and then they would be contradictory.
No, I think he would agree that if you line up all the different variations of the Quran, quoting, hi, buddy. I think he would agree that if you line up all the different variations of the Quran that are quoting Moses in the same story or scenario, I think he would say that it does look to be an apparent contradiction, but because he takes it as paraphrasing, then he's alleviated what would be the contradiction by saying that.
James, we
Now,
don't
I
even need
still,
to look. James, we don't even need to look at different recitations. Within one specific recitation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala repeats the same story multiple times in the Quran. Like, for example, the conversations between Moses and the Pharaoh. And you have different words. The similar story, of course, but you do have different words. And we can only understand that to mean paraphrasing. You don't even need different recitations for that.
I think if you don't know that that is what somebody's trying to say, when they're hearing that and it sounds like, and Moses said, or Musa said, they're going to take it as in, this is what that person actually said. I don't think that on a face value, unless you hear that paraphrasing, that you're going to assume that it's paraphrased, unless you have to start trying to make sense of an apparent contradiction. Now, I concede it if you're saying that Muslims have always called it paraphrasing and they've never said it's a direct quotation.
Well, it's a different language, right? I mean, for starters.
was gonna say this.
Second, yeah. So secondly, there's the matter of I don't know if I even gave this example previously. Um, Umar bin Abi Rabi'a used to attribute poetry to the girls that flirt with him and that are enticed by him and whatnot. And yet no one is attributing those words to the girls. Like the women that are saying these things, they're not known for the poetry. It's him who's known for the poetry. Ultimately, even though these are words that he attributes to them, everyone recognizes these words as his own words. You get me so far?
I wouldn't say that. Like if I was to quote Khalil and he said something, I would want as precise.
James, you're
Well,
not a poet, James. You're not a poet.
well, no,
This
no,
isn't literature.
no, no.
You get me?
There is such thing with poetic license, and I am a poet as a side note, so I completely get what you're saying. But it's if you're saying Moses said, and then it seems like he's saying different things, you have to at least say on the face value, not knowing that you're saying paraphrasing, that it does look to be an apparent contradiction.
All right, James. Imagine you're writing some poetry, and the poetry includes Khalil. Okay, and you and him are going back and forth. You're having a debate within the poem, and miraculously, the end of each line is a rhyme. One would assume that you guys weren't actually responding to one another in rhymes, right?
Oh yeah,
You with me, bro?
I would agree to that. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So that's what's going on in the Quran, is I'm sure you're aware. Verses end rhyming. So no one attributes these words specifically to Moses. Again, it's a different language, and it's throughout the Quran, and it's something that's very clear. Especially anyone that studies the Quran and studies these stories, and recognizes minute differences here and there, and minute differences in the rhyme scheme as well. They recognize that this has to be paraphrased. It can't be a verbatim
That's also why
translation of
I
what's
think
going
that
on.
Dr. Khalil's position on the Quran is more rational because he takes it more in a metaphorical sense, and he doesn't take things nearly in a literal sense. But once you start doing poetry, you leave a lot open to interpretation and a lot open to needing clarification. But that wasn't even my main issue. My main issue that
I'm
was
sorry.
just
I'm sorry.
establishing.
What does Khalil have to do? What does Dr. Khalil have to do with any of this? I don't get the connection.
Oh, just from his religious background, how they take the Quran metaphorically. I was just giving you an example of how I believe is the way that at least traditional Muslims would have taken it, and I think it fits more in line with his. I was just mentioning his name because I assume that you were at least familiar with him a bit enough to know what I'm
Um,
referencing.
so what I'm saying is quotes in the Quran are paraphrased statements. I'm not sure how this connects to literal and metaphorical.
Well, once you make something paraphrased, and then
Yeah.
you are calling poetic language at the same time, you're taking liberties with the communication. You are, in some cases with poetry, either trying to communicate something vague or trying to communicate something in a deep message, but you won't know unless the person who is communicating that to you it flushes out what he's trying to say. And so, in that case, I think that that's what I'm saying. Dr. Khalil would have what I believe traditionally Muslims may have held as the proper way to interpret the Quran.
I really don't see the connection, James. Paraphrasing someone, and trying to communicate what they're saying literally, doesn't really seem to have anything to do with um, making metaphors. I can't see it, James.
What's the
We probably
metaphor that you see with Musa, for example,
Actually,
James? What
actually,
metaphor do you see?
actually, it's funny because if Khalil was here, he would agree with what Farid is saying, as far as the arguments go, because even Khalil understands the paraphrasing, like the story of Musa alayhi.
Well, no, I'm not saying that Khalil would not agree. I'm saying that Khalil's interpretation of the Quran fits more within the poetic and paraphrase notion than what I would attribute to Sunni Islam. Sunni Islam
Um,
seems to be more literal,
James,
more
James, do you have
fundamental.
anyone that says, do you know any Sunni authority that says that these are verbatim quotes and there is no paraphrasing going on?
No, that's not the claim I'm making. I'm not
Okay.
saying these are
What is?
that anybody in any authority is saying that these are verbatim quotes. What my view would be is that um, stories that get retold over and over again by somebody in multiple different ways over the span of 23 years, you would expect when they're compiling those for these things to be in conflict to a degree.
Yeah, the fact they're not in conflict is the fact that it is true.
Well, they're in an apparent conflict, and the
No.
apparent conflict is that they seem to be quoting him
No,
differently.
no,
But
it's the
because
same.
of
It's the same thing. It's like, for example, Musa alayhi salam says, "I'm gonna perhaps I'll find guidance on the light he was looking." And then in another place he says, "I'm gonna get a torch, tastalun, and perhaps find guidance towards it." So there's nothing added, nor there's actually nothing subtracted. It's just different forms of words used within the
Describing it in a
rhyming of the
different
surah.
way, but it's the same story.
Yeah,
It's just the
literally
same
the
thing.
same exact story, but a different. And that's actually part of the miracle of it. We can't even do it in any way, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is able to give us multiple different ways.
and so
Kareem, let me please make it a bit simpler. James, do you believe that Muhammad, peace be upon him, memorized the Quran?
um, I absolutely do not believe that he recited the full Quran. I don't
Oh,
believe that historically. Like, I believe that he gave different variations to people, but when I look into it, I don't believe that he actually intended to compile it. But that wasn't my main objection or the
the
what led
the,
to
the
our previous
reason
conversation.
the reason why I mentioned that is because if he's reciting these different chapters and they include the same story and they have different rhyme schemes, you got to believe that's intentional. He couldn't have forgotten. Oh, I did this a few years ago, right? That's not natural.
Yeah, I just don't think
Anyways,
that it was. I just don't think it was as simple.
I'm kind of confused about what James's position is about the Quran in general because he just said something quite strange about um, what was it? Not being sure if the
I
whole thing
think
is from the
what he's
Prophet.
trying to say is that, like, if it's poetry and it's supposed to
Yeah.
intend something, that no one knows really what the poet's saying except the poet, and so no one really explained it. So it's all metaphor because poetry is
Yeah,
metaphor.
that's the
I,
part I'm confused about. He mentioned
yeah,
the
I don't get
word
that exactly.
literal and metaphor, so I don't understand how if you paraphrase it, it's not literal. I don't see the connection.
Exactly. And just because it's in poetry does not mean that it cannot be explained, even by the poetry itself, right? I
Yeah.
mean, this is one of the phenomena of the
Hey,
Quran
look
that
at that,
the
Dr.
Quran
I
Khalil.
explains
think
itself.
James called Khalil, but yeah. So if it's paraphrased, it can still be literal. I don't know what he means by the metaphoric claim. Perhaps we can have James elaborate when he comes back.
We can have Khalil on, maybe clear that up.
I sent him an invite. I think he's busy right now. But Dr. Khalil, your name was brought up a minute ago by James, so I would find it interesting if you wanted to come up and clarify something. I'm not sure if James is back or not. Um,
He's back.
Farid,
James is back.
Farid, Farid,
Okay, I am
Yep.
back now. So
Farid.
my main contention was with um, Khalil Allah, not Khalil Indani, was I was working on first explaining to Khalil that there wasn't just one hard copy version of the Quran, and then I was expressing that if all the variations and recitations are considered Quran, then you have to say that part of the Qa'at and things that were lost that Muslim sources record, you either have to say that God revealed them and intended for them to get lost, or that a chunk of the Quran was lost. And so that was where the next part of the conversation was going with me and Khalil Allah.
So
Khalil,
from
were
a
you? Were you?
Fareed,
Were
can
you
I
not
ask you a
aware that
question?
there are multiple the other recitations are printed, or what's up?
Yeah,
Khalil
I
Allah,
don't
you here,
think
brother?
I don't think Khalil Allah's like he hasn't studied this specific subject. That's probably.
Okay, right.
Fareed,
I knew
can
that
I
I knew that there were different recitations. I knew that there were different dialects, seven different dialects that it was written in. And what our conversation was that I when it got contentious with me and James was because he was saying that uh, Brother Farid, you had openly admitted, and he loved how honest you were, that you admitted that there were these seven different dialects, and you stated that there are places to where Moses speaks, and the other places talking about the same story, to where it paraphrases and says something different. And then James was claiming that you were admitting and conceding that there were apparent contradictions because the paraphrase verses say something other than the other verses talking about the same exact story. And then I was like, I don't think Brother Farid had ever admitted to there being contradictions in the one Quran. And that's where we're at now.
It's basically the terminology difference. So I believe that in the conversation that he definitely conceded because he was polite and he answered all my questions. He was straightforward. I want to be clear on that. That he conceded that there would be apparent contradictions if you tried to line these up and you saw that now these words are going to conflict. But I said in our conversation too, Khalil, that the way that he worded around that was saying that they're paraphrased. Once something's paraphrased, you no longer have that issue of contradiction. We can still talk about other problems, but that
Uh,
was his response.
James, you gotta be more charitable than that, man. Like, anyone here can quote anyone here on multiple occasions, and we all would be paraphrasing one another. And if we repeat the same story twice, then we're gonna be accused of contradicting one another.
No,
Come on,
that's
James.
not what's happening. What we're saying is that if you line up the stories and the stories conflict with what action was taken or what happened or how he said different things, you can say paraphrased, and I'm fine with that. But it's just like when us Christians talk about the Trinity and we're like the apparent contradiction. We're not saying it's a true contradiction, but it's an honest statement to say that you're willing to admit that if you line these up, somebody reads them side by side, they're going to assume there's conflict until you are telling them they're paraphrased. Could you at least concede that for charitability?
James, no, I can't concede any of this because it's the nature of language. We report things from one another all the time, and we paraphrase the same statements differently. If I say that James had a burger for lunch, and the next day I said James had fast food as a meal the other day, it wouldn't be a contradiction, even if you lined them up. You could force a contradiction by making the claim that these are different words,
So
but
think about
ultimately I'm
this.
meaning the same thing.
If we were saying that uh, Justin headed left towards the donut store, then I said to you the next day, Justin headed right to the donut store. Now, you could say that I'm paraphrasing the situation, but to say that there's not a direct contradiction when you're looking at the two sentences between right and left, I don't think it's you being charitable. I think you'd at
No,
least want to say apparent contradiction on the
that
face.
would be. I
Then
would agree. I would agree. That's clearly a contradiction. Left and right are two different things. That's a contradiction. You wouldn't be able to reconcile that.
just like when we're reading
And
the
I think what the next question is in the Quran, can you bring something up that's similar to that would contradict in that fashion?
there's things like where the Quran says I will or they will. And these are within the two variations. So when you're looking at that and you're trying to reconcile it, you could still say that he's paraphrasing the situation. He's not giving you exactly what happened or an exact quotation, but you would have to still admit, though, that on face value, these seem to have an apparent contradiction.
Yeah, but
Fareed
James,
did
can
a
you give an
video on that.
example of these
Somebody pinned
verses?
the video that Fareed did on that.
Yeah, I'm just very
Anybody?
curious. I think it helps to be more specific, right? So if you're saying it's a contradiction, let's look into it and see if it actually is one.
Yeah,
So you're
bring up
saying,
the actual verse.
and then we can look at this together.
I'm outside, but I know we've talked about this example before, and I know it's there, the I will or they will. I think you guys could be charitable and at least discuss.
If you'd bring up the verse number, chapter number, I'd happily do so.
Yeah, because I'm not familiar with I will, they will. Like I don't know what that
Yeah,
means.
I'm outside. So I'll give you an example. So the majority of Muslims use this main Quran, the Hufs Quran, but there are other recitations that are used depending on where you are in the world. And if you line these up, there are some that have completely different words, not just like different voweling. And so these things would appear to be would appear to conflict. But Farid said that his view is, and what he believes is the Orthodox Muslim position, is that all these variations are considered in totality one Quran. So then that brings to the other problem, which was me and Khalil were talking about. That means that if you're just reading the Hafs Quran, you're only reading a part of the Quran. You're not reading the complete Quran.
Actually, James, the prophetic hadith says that each of these ahruf within themselves are sufficient. So a harf would be, like a specific recitation, would be the Quran itself.
You know, even Lasr is sufficient, right? One surah.
Yeah, but see, here's the thing. Like, if I said that my scripture says that Jesus is God and the Father's God and the Spirit's God, you wouldn't just take that, as a way to reconcile what you see as an apparent contradiction. So just because something says that it's sufficient, if you line Book A and Book B up and they differ in any way, it violates the law of indiscernibles, and that means that they cannot be identical.
James, I don't know about you, but do you attribute the Quran to the Prophet, peace be upon him?
Also, and
As in, do you believe he's
that
the author for the Quran?
sorry, but
Do you
that
believe that's the case?
the last statement you made also, James, was false because you can't say the same thing and mean two different.
Sorry, you were breaking up, Kareem. What'd you say?
Yeah, I said the last thing you said is actually false. I disagree with.
Yeah, I understand that you would disagree because that's what is within your religion, and the same way
No,
that a
no, I'm
Christian.
saying you would disagree with it.
No, because when it comes to that, I don't have Jesus and God the Father sitting right in front of me is two separate things that I'm trying to reconcile. We start with one being and go to three persons. And so there is, on face value, no apparent contradiction in the Trinity. Now, there is potentially in some models when you flesh out being in person and some other distinctions. But when we're talking about the Quran, if you have two different versions and there are other versions, but you sit them down in
No,
front of
no, but
you,
if you have two different versions, right?
yes.
And you couldn't even show me two different words. But let's say you have two different words and they are saying the same thing. Where's the contradiction is what I don't understand.
Oh, so these two different versions aren't saying the same thing. So
Oh, then give
if you,
me the exact, because I've never seen that, right? And I've asked you for evidence multiple times.
I've sent you a few website links where it'll actually line the Arabic, because you can actually go and buy online different hard copy recitations of the Quran, which the Arabic will be different, some of the words will be different. Now the
No, but I've literally looked at every single word, right? And I've seen the claims, and I've never seen any words different. So again, you might see harakat that are different, which is not really an issue. Again, do you have an example of
well,
two words that are completely different being used?
what about the classic one? What is it, Malik and Maliki? Those are two different, completely different words. Now you might say
No,
that they have similar meaning, but they are completely different Arabic words.
yeah, but
James,
No, they're actually the same root or the same, but again, these complement. Oh, go ahead, Farid. I'm sorry.
More, barakallah feek. James, do you believe that, where do you believe that the whole Malik versus Malik came from? So Malik is king, Malik is owner. Who do you believe that came from?
So from my understanding, and I'm not trying to pinhole or pigeonhole one variation of Islam because I know that several variations of Islam exist. So I mean no disrespect. So I'm trying to
Go
at
for it,
least
bro.
address you as a Sunni and not like a Shia, because the Shia would probably
I
tell me.
appreciate it.
The Shia is like 8%. It's not like we don't really have the issue of Christianity with the
Let him finish,
sect.
bro. Let him finish. Let him finish.
Well, hold on,
Go ahead, James.
just for a quick second to answer Kareem. No, you do have several big camps within Sunni Islam. That's just a fact of reality. It doesn't mean that Islam is false, but you have to recognize that that's truth. There's not like
Let's go back, James. Let's go back. Where do you believe Malik and Malik come from?
so. From my understanding of Sunni Islam, the
Mm-hmm.
Prophet recited several different
No, no. Historically, where do you believe it came from?
Oh,
Doesn't matter what Sunnis believe in. Where do you believe it came from?
um, I believe that the Prophet recited so many things, so many different ways that they ended
Mm-hmm.
up compiling different versions of the Quran. And then, in a
Okay.
nutshell, the early Islamic first generation burned a lot of these copies to produce just this one kind of standardized Uthmanic text. And I
So,
think that that's what
so
I
to
honor.
paraphrase, sounds good. So to paraphrase what you're saying, you believe that Malik and Malik were both taught by Muhammad, right? Peace be upon him.
I believe that he said them. I don't necessarily agree that like he taught them. I think that what
Okay.
happened is when he recited different things to different people, I think that he forgot what he had recited to others. And then when somebody
Okay.
realized that there was a conflict, there was even a hadith where
Yeah.
they bring him to the prophet and say, I've never heard you say this, such and such. And then the prophet said,
Yep.
both are from God.
Yep. Okay, so you believe that the Surah Al-Fatiha, the first chapter of the Quran that's recited out loud at least 6 times a day at Fajr and Maghrib and Isha by the Prophet publicly, something that he's doing 23 years of his prophethood, teaching people, of course, not only during prayer but even after prayer. You believe that he butchered Al-Fatiha and he messed up, and instead of saying Malik, he said Malik, or vice versa.
So I'm not sure that there were nearly as many reciters of the Quran as what Sunni Islam would like to portray for the early generation. I don't think there was that many people who could argue to have almost a complete Quran. I think that
It's
there was a
irrelevant.
but
James, that's irrelevant.
you're asking me my view. You're asking me
Yeah.
not to take a not to look at it.
You said that he made mistakes. You said that he made mistakes in reciting Al-Fatiha. I'm asking you, do you really believe it's reasonable that not the smallest, one of the smallest chapters in the Quran, that he repeats publicly at least 6 times a day and teaches other people this chapter all the time? You believe he butchered it and made the mistake and said king instead of owner?
So my thing is I don't necessarily buy the claim that he said these things every day because I don't
Okay.
find
Wow.
it credible.
Okay.
What?
And
So
where do you get where do you
he
get that
didn't pray,
from?
he didn't pray
I
five
mean,
times
like,
a day?
Well, they're
yeah. I mean, this is
he's
So
asking.
hold on. Let's just for clarity. I'm not sure if James. So James, in the first chapter of the Quran, it says Malik Yawmiddin. In the first chapter of the Quran, and that Surah Al-Fatiha is stated within every single time a Muslim prays, every single time the Prophet peace be upon him prayed, he had to say that out loud at least 6 times a day. So that's what Brother Farid is getting to, is that you think that he would butcher something that he necessarily had to say out loud at least 6 times a
More
day.
like at least 17. At least
yeah. I mean,
17
Well,
times
probably.
no,
I
actually.
no,
mean,
but
out loud.
if you say it, out loud, for for Fajr,
Yeah, it's two
Maghrib.
because it's two rakat, four rakat, and then three, and then
Yeah, yeah.
two.
So he's right.
Four. It
Kareem,
adds up to
Kareem.
70.
Yeah,
Hey
Kareem, he's right.
James,
So yeah, out
Oh,
loud
out
he goes
loud the
6 times.
two. Yeah,
Correct.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I
So
didn't.
anyways,
If I could,
MashaAllah,
so
brother
Farid, I want to hear
Khalil
James.
Allah detail.
if I
Yeah, I
could,
just want to see what James is gonna say.
hey,
if I
just a
one
quick
or two
question
at a
for you,
time.
James. I wanna because you mentioned this earlier.
But
So
if you ask a question,
if
really
someone
engage.
recites Maliki
You know?
Yawmiddin, is according to the Sunni position, is if someone recites Maliki Yawmiddin and Maliki Yawmiddin, are they both reciting the Quran?
Yes, according to the Sunni position,
Okay,
all
so they're
Bro,
both
bro,
recitation.
they're
bro,
both
bro.
reciting the Quran. So how are
Okay,
there two Qurans
Raji,
there?
look. You guys have to
Let's
let
keep it.
me
Yeah,
a little
too
bit.
many are
Let
engaging.
me
Yeah,
only.
let James respond.
So, moving away from
Where's your evidence?
looking at.
Where's your evidence that Muhammad peace be upon him didn't pray 5 times a day? Because this is new.
I'm not saying that he didn't pray 5 times a day. I don't see anything that would substantiate to me that the Quran was preserved or that he didn't replace verses and change things quite often.
Because you said he butchered it, right? You said that he made the mistake. Okay. And I responded by saying, no, it's the simplest chapter of the Quran. It's something that all kids memorize, every single Muslim memorizes. It's not conceivable that the Prophet of Islam butchered it. And then you said, well, hey, I got no reason to believe that he prayed 5 times a day.
Well, I
So
really
he
haven't,
probably did
to
butcher
be
it.
fair, Fareed, I really haven't had a chance to respond to much. So it's very hard for me to engage.
Your
I'm
time.
trying to
Take
engage with different points. So so what my claim is on the table is that he revealed there's several different variations, more variations of the Quran than what Muslims have today, and that what Muslims have today is what's left interpretation and the different ways that the Prophet said things. I'm not necessarily making a claim in particular on the first couple of verses, but I would say that I don't see anything from my studies that would say that the Prophet was doing Islam in the same way that Sunni Muslims do it today.
Hey Farid, can I just have one simple follow up? So out of your
have
study
one
today,
more.
have you? Yeah, I just wanted to ask this one. I'm very curious though. You said they have many more variations that Muslims know. So, out of your research, have you seen any of these variants that Muslims don't know of? I'm just curious as to how you know they exist. If no one knows what they are, I mean, have you seen them? Do you know where they are?
Oh, so I don't have the Hadith handy, and maybe Fareed's familiar with them, but there's a verse in the Quran that talks about when Allah will reveal a verse, and then He will either replace the verse for something better or something similar. And so the Quran we know in early Islam, and this is me speaking from my view, not necessarily representing Sunni Islam, that there were a lot of different variations of the Quran. Now, what I've read is the position that these variations were supposed to be lost, that they weren't supposed to continue on. But from my understanding, the Prophet revealed all kinds of things, several
Yeah.
different ways.
So I think we're having a problem with the language here. These are not the variant of the Quran. They were never considered. The Quran is considered the Quran after the revelation is complete. I mean, pieces of the Quran do not make the entire Quran. The revelation of the Quran. So if they were what we call mansukh or abrogated, these verses, they're not part of the Quran, so they're not variants. They would never exist in any variant, and that's why in any of the variants that we have today, that there are used that we preserve ourselves. By the way, non-Muslims don't know this. We have to teach them this. They only get it from our sources. It's not like they uncovered some resource and they got it from there. It's from our sources in which we present this. None of these verses exist because they're not part. So the idea of abrogation and variants are two different things.
Yeah, but here's the thing too is that when it comes like, and I'm using the Trinity just as a side example again, when it comes to the Trinity, the majority of the things that like the Muslim metaphysician, for example, would use to critique the Trinity, he got that from Christians. But we very much so believe that the Trinity is ultimately not a contradiction. So just because the ultimate belief is that there is no issue doesn't mean that just because we're giving you information, you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, but the problem is, James, you don't believe in abrogation. So we're talking about abrogation versus variance, right? And there's a big difference. With Christianity, we don't know. Like, you'll never find a Quran with one with 109 surahs, one with 114, one with 112. You literally have additions of the Bible and verses. We don't have that.
Well,
So it's an entirely different comparison.
you'll find a couple of Qurans that have the surahs in different order. You'll find one that has two extra chapters, 116. So in early Islam,
Wait,
you can
wait,
find.
wait, wait. I'm sorry.
Can I address that,
Where is
James?
this Quran?
You're
Yeah, I'm
talking
just
about
curious.
companion manuscripts, James.
No, one second.
You're talk,
Where is this Quran that has two extra surahs? I mean, it's the first time hearing. I mean, is there any copy I can buy online of this?
they're not extra surahs. They're like du'as
No,
that
yeah,
they
hold on. I
compile.
just want to ask. I want to know because James said there's variants of the Quran that have two extra chapters
He's
or
talking about
in
Ibn
different orders.
Mas'ud's.
No. That's not Ibn Masud because Ibn Masud does not. He doesn't have his own Quran. I'm just let him answer. I want to know. So James, you said there's Quran with two extra chapters and there's Quran with a different organization. Are these available today?
Riot is representing what I said very well. And these, his companions who knew him the best, who got the Quran from him, had different variations of the Quran, including this individual who had two extra surahs.
Yeah. So, by the way,
Can I respond to
Riyadh,
this?
one second, brother. Ibn Masud did not have two extra surahs. What he argued is that the Fatiha and the two Mu'awwidhatayn, the ending surahs, should not be written in the Mus'haf. This was the original opinion he had, not because it's not the Quran, it's because everyone had it memorized, so it was unable to
Yeah,
forget. Actually,
there's a
this
hadith
would.
that supports what you're saying, by the way.
Yeah, hold on. I know. Riyadh, just one second, brother. So actually, this is supporting the claim that Farid is making that it would be impossible that the Prophet would butcher because even his closest companions were like, this surah is so often recited that it would be impossible that anybody would forget this, that we don't have to actually include it in part of the Mus'haf.
Yeah.
So this is actually something that's actually supporting our claim. There's never been a more. Ibn Mas'ud did not believe there's two extra surahs in the Quran.
So I would
As a
say,
matter,
that the and all this will be the last part of my interpretation of it. Then we'll go back to what I'm feeling Sunni Islam is saying. So I believe that within the destroying of early manuscripts and copies, the fact that the Prophet had all these different variations, I don't believe that you can maintain that the Quran was preserved. But that's my opinion. Now, when I look at Sunni Islam and I'm steel manning what I believe you guys are saying, all the variations are considered one Quran. All the Quran that are not recited today or are not remembered are because God intended it that way. But then my logical problem would still stand because if you say that the Hufs is a complete Quran, yet you can derive different meaning from the other recitations, and people who do different jurisprudence will actually look at all the variations to help formulate their conclusion, then I have to conclude that logically speaking, you're only reading a part of the Quran.
James, can I ask you a quick question? So when Sunnis, let's just take the Sunni position, when we recite Maliki Yawmiddin and Maliki Yawmiddin, are do you, is our position that we're reciting the Quran?
Yes, your position is that you are reciting the Quran. That if you
We're
are,
reciting the Quran one way, and then we're reciting the Quran another way. I fail to see how that's two Qurans. That's just a different way of reciting it, right? But it's still the
I, I
Quran, right?
I disagree because of the different meaning and the different recitations, and
You
that
said yes,
does.
so
No, I'm saying I disagree that from looking at it, I understand that's what you guys are saying, that if you are reading all these different variations, each time you're only reciting one Quran, and that there's only one complete
Me,
Quran. But but
I
still,
have to stay muted real quick, but I like you guys to continue this. But can we now agree, James, that Brother Farid did not did not admit or concede to any type of apparent contradictions?
I would say that here's what I'm willing to do. If he's willing to admit that if I quote you as going left, and then I quote you the next time as going right, that would be an apparent contradiction, then we would be okay to put a pin in it and move on.
It would be a definite contradiction. It wouldn't be an apparent contradiction. It would be a contradiction that's not reconcilable, as opposed to the variants that you find in the variant recitations.
Well,
So far so good.
so for example, if I said Khalil said I will, or he said they will,
Give
that
me a
would
verse.
that would be an apparent
Give,
contradiction, though, correct?
give me a verse.
Yeah, James, this
Well,
would be
I'm just
easier if you give a verse from the Quran so we
no,
can
no. What
stop using examples.
I'm saying is we can put a pin in it. But if he just confirms, for the sake of the conversation, that if I find a verse that says I will or they will, and it's between two different variations of the Quran, if he's willing to concede now, that's an apparent contradiction. Hoping that if I find that verse, that would
Just dig it up, James. I don't like to discuss hypotheticals. Just
Just
dig it up.
just a quick question, James. So if this person that says I is part of a group they, is it a contradiction?
in this particular juncture, if you're saying that he's paraphrasing the situation, I think you can get out of it. I just I understand the reluctance to say apparent contradiction given the Quran, because I know what that can do in the Islamic community, and I know that you have a very public YouTube channel, so I don't want to put you in like a bad situation, so I won't
That's
press
really
it.
cute.
That's
That's
pretty
cute,
funny.
James. That's really
No. I think what's happening is that you're trying to get him to concede something without providing any
Yeah, any
contextual
evidence at
That's
all.
right. So that's the problem. So if you're going to make a claim, actually, the irony here is that you're trying to establish something in the Quran without actually substantiating it, and I think that's where we're having a
Hey,
problem.
someone pull up
How
Farid's
about
video that he
Surah today
made and
157?
bring the verses that Farid used and let's discuss it with James.
Now,
Can we do that?
what I'm
Today
saying,
157.
I'm just asking a very simple question that I feel like anybody could answer, and we're not even looking at the Quran right now. It's if I have a quotation, and in one quotation I say I will, and in the other quotation I say they will, that would be an apparent contradiction. But if you guys,
No. It's not a contradiction because it's I.
So,
I mean, first of all, look.
just
Here's the
real
thing.
quick, Khalilullah, Jake says he can't come in the room because someone has him blocked. If someone can,
I think it's
oh,
James.
so here's what happens, guys. The Muslim metaphysician boots me out of every room, even if I don't start a fight or don't say anything. So I chose to block him like he has me blocked. So when I am off the stage, then he can come in.
Can you just unblock him real quick?
Yeah, we'll bring him up in now. I mean, he's off the stage, so.
May I interject?
I go hard in the paint, yeah, homie, I'm a saint.